The New South Wales Government is seeking public feedback on the proposed Great Koala National Park, which I think is fantastic because koalas are on the endangered species list in New South Wales and they need protection. But there is some common and significant problems with New South Wales national parks, and I reckon this is a great opportunity to put a new blueprint down for better management of national parks in the formation of this new park. So I'm going to go through what I think the problems are and also what the solutions are.
So this is a map of the proposed Great Koala National Park. You can see the green areas which are existing national park and the orange and grey areas which will become national park. And most of those orange and grey areas are now state forest. So we have a very good history of what's been happening in those areas already. Now, it's great that they should be protected once this becomes a national park from land clearing, development, forestry, agriculture and mining. Fantastic. One of the other biggest threats for a koala is severe bushfires. And the management style employed by New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service up until this point has been one where there is very little burning going on that allows the fuel loads to increase massively within the bush. The trees are closely spaced, the canopies are touching, and when a bushfire does happen from a lightning strike, arson, for whatever reason, it can become impossible to stop. And we saw the absolute devastation of the Black Summer bushfires, which climate change would have played a part, but we've had devastating bushfires under New South Wales National Parks management going back through the decades. If you're a koala, this is one of the greatest threats because you will be burnt to a cinder in the trees. These fires are so hot that they even destroy the nutrients in the soil, the seeds left in the soil, and afterwards, for months, there is nothing that a koala could eat, even if it did survive the fire. They are widespread, there's no place to refuge. I think initially they said 1 billion native animals died in the fire. The last I heard it was 2 billion. This is an absolute catastrophe, which for hundreds of years, the evidence of that one fire will be evident because many of those trees were hundreds of years old. This is a big deal to treat or manage a national park to the point where it just gets absolutely wiped out, almost like a nuclear war. That is one of the biggest dangers I see of this Great Koala National Park, is that it will increase the likelihood that these places will get absolutely annihilated in a severe bushfire. So I just want to explain quickly what Aboriginal land management was and how it improved the landscape, not only from reducing the likelihood of severe bushfires, but it also provided a much greater food source and habitat for the animals like the koala or other tree-dwelling animals that require hollows in the trees. So under traditional burning, which is done at times of the year where the fire is small, the temperatures are much lower, and the effect is not just increasing the food at the bottom of the food chain, which feeds all the grass-eating animals, the carnivores that then eat them, but it also reduces the spacing between the trees, allows more sunlight in to get to the grass. The canopies of the trees are not touching each other, so if a fire does get up to the canopy, then it is less likely to spread from one tree to the next. Now, it doesn't eradicate the chance of a severe bushfire, but it greatly reduces it. So if you are a koala, you would much rather a landscape where Aboriginal land management techniques are employed. And typically, New South Wales National Parks have not done that. And you can even ask ChatGPT like I did, and it does not think much of what New South Wales National Parks have done as far as managing the landscape. So hopefully, under this new park, we can get rid of some of the old deadwood executive way of thinking of managing our wilderness areas. And a lot of that is based on a leave no trace mindset adopted from Europe, where the first people that came here in boats in the 1700s, I don't want to get too political on this, that mindset of leave no trace is probably a fair enough thing if you've come from Europe, because what humans did to Europe environmentally has been pretty savage, right? To employ that same idea here, that any human interaction with the landscape is bad, is a very destructive mindset, and that is why we have the parks in such terrible condition, because that mindset is nature knows best. Aboriginal people were part of nature before we got here, and they traditionally burnt for so long, at least 11,500 years, that the ecology of the Australian landscape evolved for that regime. So when I talk about some of the management strategies, it's important to understand that putting a ring fence around something and not touching it, which has been typically the New South Wales management style, that is immensely detrimental to the environment. And if you wanted to destroy koalas and you hated them, which I'm sure nobody in national parks does, but if you did want to destroy them, the best way to do it would be to manage it exactly as the way they've been managed so far, which is allow the fuel loads to build up, so when a bushfire starts, it is uncontrollable and annihilates everything. Just on the leave no trace, there are great things about the leave no trace phrase. It's great that you don't litter, and leave no trace encourages people not to litter. In fact, we should be, if you see litter, pick it up, not just leave no trace you were there, but leave a positive trace. I'm just talking about the bad hangovers of it, which most people have no idea about. There's no way I can fully explain traditional burning in this short video. The final thing I want to add about it is very different to prescribed burning, otherwise known as hazard reduction burns. These fires aim solely to get rid of fuel loads in the landscape, and they don't have any regard for the positive outcomes that traditional burning have. I filmed this fire, which was conducted by the RFS. The head of the burn said it was a successful burn. It was so hot that it burnt up the bark of the trees, killed the entire leaf canopy, which later fell down, and creates its own problems on the bottom with different kinds of invasive species coming in. So please don't think that traditional burning and prescribed burning or hazard reduction is the same thing. So humans have direct positive effects on the Australian landscape. I'm not just talking now about Aboriginal people, I'm now talking in the modern day as well. Many of these areas, there has been invasive species removal allowed by hunters in these parks. The word hunting is a very divisive term, and there are a lot of assumptions made by people, well-intentioned people, that absolutely love New South Wales national parks. If you have no plan and you just go, oh no, we don't like hunting, guns are bad, archery is bad, it's just bad, what are you saying yes to for invasive species control? In my lifetime, I grew up going to the Snowy Mountains at least once a month until I was 18. I did not see a single deer my entire childhood. Now, when I go back there, I was there 2 weeks ago, in the Ski Tube car park, there were deer roaming around. A couple of years ago, I was in a campsite, Thredbo Diggings. There were herds of deer, and there was a ranger there, and I said, hey mate, plenty of deer around, and he goes, yep. I mean, that has happened under New South Wales National Park management. So if your idea is, nah, hunting's bad, what is your plan? 1080, lots of 1080. So 1080 is a manufactured poison that doesn't just kill the invasive species it targets, it kills a lot of other native animals in the landscape. I was in New Zealand last year, and they have terrible problems with deer, and they are now carpet bombing entire valleys of New Zealand by helicopter, and they are targeting deer. Now, national parks don't say they're targeting deer, but they are targeting deer, to the point where they were having to lift out the carcasses of deer that were clogging up the streams next to the root burn track, because the public were like, far out, what's going on with all these deer? And you can't eat anything in that landscape because of the danger of 1080, which is spread all throughout it. So if you don't have an invasive species plan, they have already got rampantly out of control in New Zealand, and they're having to go to drastic measures. Carpet bombing, chemicals by helicopters every 30 to 100 metres in the landscape, that's pretty drastic. We really don't want to get there. So one of the main objections to people removing invasive species, and as far as I'm aware, that's the only thing you're allowed to hunt in the state parks anyways, invasive species. You're not allowed to shoot native animals, right? So one of the biggest resistance is safety. As far as I'm aware, there has been no incident where someone has been shot in the state parks. So these areas which are about to become national parks, if your objection is safety, we have, for the first time ever, a perfect track record of these areas and the safety that's happened over the decades in these areas. So invasive species are incredibly damaging to the environment, and you need to have a plan that works. And currently, if you look at Kosciuszko National Park and the other national parks around Australia, national parks are failing to manage invasive species. I do think there needs to be flexibilities in the ways that these areas are used. There's been a lot of friction in national parks about four-wheel drive access. Now, in New South Wales National Parks, it is illegal to even have a chainsaw in your car. If a four-wheel driver wants to drive along a four-wheel drive track, and there is a tree falling across the road, they literally just have to turn around and go back the other way. Freedom of movement through national parks helps when these severe bushfires come along. I really don't think that the state forests where you can currently collect firewood, and as far as I'm aware, take a chainsaw, they are still perfectly habitable, healthy places for koalas to inhabit and the other native animals. This comes back to this leave no trace thing, and also a complete lack of trust in the public. Like, public are just considered complete numpties. The average person using a national park has concern and respect for the bush, and if they can come across a tree that's fallen across the track and remove it to save national parks doing it and to allow freer access for the fighting of severe bushfires, that is a good thing for the bush, it's a good thing for the humans. A lot of these people have been visiting these places their whole lives as state forests. I've been walking my dog in a particular state forest near my sister's place near Coffs Harbour. That's about to stop because it will soon become a national park. And I don't think the koalas will breathe a sigh of relief. They'll just be fretting a little bit if they knew what was going to happen about the high fire risk that's about to happen. The idea that collecting firewood is really bad for the environment is also based on the leave no trace construct. Now, there are places in New South Wales national parks where you can gather firewood. Most people don't understand that because it's very hard to find the rules. And this is another problem with New South Wales national parks, is it's very hard to know what you can and you can't do in a national park. It's written in what's called a plan of management, which is a management document. It's not something that's designed for the public to find. It's very hard to comb through it and find out what you can and can't do. And that is something that needs to be addressed as well. There are other indirect benefits from humans having access to the wilderness. For example, Lake Pedder in Tasmania. It was a gazetted National Park World Heritage Area, and when the Tasmanian government wanted to flood it for hydro, they revoked those areas and they said, "No, stuff it, we are putting in a hydro, industrialised destruction of this national park," right? So if you think that national park is an automatic protection forever, you are wrong. So the more humans that have a connection to that area, the bigger the defence for the next time a state government or federal government wants to industrialise a gazetted national park or World Heritage Area. It's a serious thing that it still needs to be defended by people ready to fight for it. Human use of areas or freer use of areas improves human happiness, mental health, physical health. And there have been many humans that have a long history of using these areas, and it is unnecessary, I think, to restrict them out, as will happen if it becomes a normal national park. There are other things with pretty much negligible impact. As far as I'm aware, it is against the law to collect or forage for bush tucker in a national park. There is a notion, the leave no trace notion, that if you break any kind of plant, well, you can't do that, you've destroyed it, you're bad. Aboriginal people, there was between 300,000 and 1 million Aboriginal people roaming the landscape, having fires in the landscape, making tracks through the landscape before Europeans got here, and they were managing it doing a good job of managing it. Having a campfire, a remnant campfire that you can see someone had a campfire there 6 months ago, that offends a lot of European background Australians, and they think, "Oh, that's so bad that I can see a fire scar." You need to relax. That has been part of Australia's history for 60,000 years. That is an aesthetic issue. That is not an environmental issue. Dogs. Whilst it might not be better for the environment to have domestic dogs, a domestic dog in the environment is not that big a deal, considering there are a great deal of wild dogs. Now, there might be times in particular areas where you really don't want that, and I'm going to talk about that in a sec. So let's look at the national park model, and I'm going to tell you the issues that I see with it. So a national park is a very large area which pretty much has the same rules for the entire area within the park, and they are managed via what's called a plan of management. So basically, same rules for the entire area. That's not flexible. It's also very hard to find out what you can and can't do in a national park, and that is a real problem too. I think it's National Park's job to make it very easy for the public to know what they can and can't do. So I think a far better model is to copy the Marine Park model. So this is a Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority zoning map, and I'm going to talk about what is better about this model. So when you look at the vast area covered by the marine park, it's broken down into zones, and each of those zones have different rules based on the ecological needs and the human needs. It gives you much more flexibility to manage a certain protected species here, or have a different rule in an area where you can be much more freer to do recreational activities. Another fantastic thing is it has a table where it shows exactly what you can and can't do. It has a list of the activities down the left-hand side and a tick and flick, yes or no, whether you can actually do that thing in a particular zone. So if this was to be a land park, for example, instead of talking about crabbing, boating and aquaculture, you could have things like free camping, dogs permitted, firewood collection. You could even break that down further. If it is an area where traditional burning fire practitioners believe there is too much undergrowth, they could say firewood collection for wood of a diameter no more than 5 centimetres or 10 centimetres. You could have different zones for firewood collection where the firewood collection is actually beneficial to the ecology of the landscape. I was talking about dogs. There are areas where the impact of a domestic dog is much lower and other areas where it might be much higher. So you could restrict or guide the places, not guide, you can enforce the places where dogs are allowed and not allowed within a park. It is a fantastic thing to be able to go on a long walk with your dog, even a multi-day hike. So if there was a fire trail identified where it would be a minor impact to allow domestic dogs, you could have a massive long multi-day hike through the Great Koala National Park where dogs are permitted provided they go no further than 200 metres off track. There's currently nothing that exists like this in Australia that I'm aware of in really nice setting. Now there might be times where you have a particular species that it's the last or only existing area where this particular species exists, and that area could have the highest amount of restrictions on it compared to another area which is like, you know what, this place, there's not too much you can do to this place to destroy it with the recreational uses that people might want to use it for. That is an area with much freer ability for the public to use other things, you know, horse riding, etc. You've got to remember that these places that are currently state forest, these things have been allowed for that whole time. And when you go to these areas, they are not environmentally trashed. And like I said, you can use this human activity to improve the ecology of the landscape. Absolutely prime spear making bamboo here. As soon as it becomes a national park, this invasive species, you won't be allowed to touch it, even though removing it is good for the environment. And improve the likelihood that it will be protected from future major industrialisation. So you've got to look at this new model as being a win-win, not a lose for the environment. It's a positive for the environment if you look at it with a more common sense historical lens of the way the Australian bush was before Europeans arrived. I don't know whether New South Wales National Park's executives had the flexibility to do something like this. I hope they do. If they don't, then maybe it shouldn't be called a national park. Maybe it should just be called the Great Koala Park, not the Great Koala National Park, because they might be worried that, if this people know that you're allowed to use a dog in this park, then they'll apply that to everywhere else. They'll just treat people like complete idiots. And I know it must be frustrating as a ranger when you come across complete idiots. But basically, rules are rules. If you make this easy to follow, then it's much easier for you to enforce it. The other great thing about Marine Park Model is they have an app which shows clearly all of the areas. So you can download this app, be offline, put a pin on your position, and it will tell you everything that you can and you can't do. And then you can report sightings of species that national parks might want to know about. You could then put on all of the other information, one source. So there's a great deal of effort being spent by Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. It would be really nice if you could just politely ask Great Barrier Marine Park Authority, hey, can we steal your idea? We're all on the same team here. This is, I think, federal government funding, but it doesn't matter. Like we've got to stop reinventing the wheel, be efficient. IP is expensive. And here's an example. When New South Wales National Parks created the booking system to combat COVID-19, they started charging a booking fee, right? And most people thought that booking fee was going to the campground. That $6 fee you've been paying for the last 6 years only goes to pay for the company that creates the website that takes your money. Okay? So we've got to be smarter as a society and not recreate things that have already been created in a fantastic way. I think this is like best practice. And I understand this quite well because I sailed up the Great Barrier Reef, spent 50 days in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. There were so many rules I had to comply with, but it was much easier because of the system that they had created. Now, People might criticise me for being critical of national parks. It's the policies I'm criticising, and I understand one of the limitations that national parks has is funding. So really, we've got to look at, is the state government funding national parks correctly? If not, why not? If the state government doesn't have enough money, yeah, why not? But then we've also got to look at, is the federal government providing enough money to state to then provide money to national parks? If you look at the amount of gross domestic product, it's 0.1% that Australia spends on land management of wilderness areas. We spend 2% on defence. There were, as I said, 300,000 to 1 million, possibly more, Aboriginal people roaming the landscape, and they were effectively full-time land carers. And if you look at the amount of people who go to national parks, it's nowhere near that. The Australian Defence Force only has 60,000 personnel. So there was way more than 5 times the amount of Aboriginal people managing the landscape, and we expect a small group of people to do it. As a society, we need to place greater value on our wilderness areas and apportion an appropriate amount of funding, which is far higher than what it currently gets. Where does that money come from? Well, we give a whole bunch of tax breaks to massive companies. Companies like Santos haven't paid tax in 10 years. There are many other companies in Australia that either pay no tax or they get a whole bunch of incentives. We're currently giving property investors $245 billion in tax breaks over the next 10 years. We send a whole bunch of our resources overseas. We should be a country like Saudi Arabia that is absolutely loaded because of the resources that we have, but our governments doesn't seek the public's fair share of it or take tax fairly across the system. So there is plenty of scope for a greater amount of money to be spent on land management and for our wilderness areas to be in far better condition ecologically, and also far better freedom for humans to be able to use, and humans improving this beautiful areas that we have as well. So that's my 2 cents. If you like the idea of the marine park model, please let me know. Now, you may not agree with all of the things I've said about, I think this activity is good, that activity is good. I totally understand that. I'm not saying what I say is 100% the perfect solution, but I think this model, if applied to national parks, would have far better outcomes. But feel free to drop a comment, or the request for public feedback for the Great Koala National Park closes on the 1st of March. That's only a couple of weeks away from when I'm shooting this. So you can do a survey, and right at the end it says, do you have any comments to make? If you like what I've said, you can say, hey, yes, just copy them, paste the URL from this video and put it in there and say, I'd like you to apply this technique that Mike's said. And if you don't like some of the things, say, I like Mike's idea, but I don't think we should have dogs. Or I like this idea, but I'm totally against hunting. That's fine, but you can just, what's more important is, I think this is a better model. And if you agree, it would help if you fill out the survey and let the New South Wales Government know. I'm actually heading to State Parliament on Friday. I'm going to be speaking to the State Environment Minister and also some of the other opposition ones as well, just to show them the plan and see what they think. So please show your support for it if you do think it's a good idea, or even if you have a completely separate idea, please provide that, because the more people that the government sees who are contributing to this, the better ideas they can get, and the more they will understand how much we as residents of Australia care about our wilderness areas.